Welcome to Order Before Modern Systems. Here, we explore how everyday order functioned before modern systems, institutions, and formal rules existed. This channel examines how routine, habit, and shared expectations shaped daily life long before modern organization took form. Public places have always done more than hold people. They have shaped how people act. When many people share the same space, each person gains opportunities, but also faces risks. You can trade, worship, learn news, find work, meet strangers, and settle disputes. At the same time, crowds can bring theft, fights, cheating, insults, panic, and disorder. Long before modern police departments, communities built systems to manage these risks. A key tool was the public place itself. A public place is not only open space. It is space with rules, expectations, and watchers. Those rules may be written in law, spoken by officials, or understood through custom. The design of the space, the timing of activities, and the presence of witnesses all work together. Over centuries, different societies used squares, markets, temples, churches, taverns, streets, bridges, gates, and courthouses to guide behavior. They did this through visibility, reputation, routine, and real consequences. This explanation looks at how public places structured behavior across major historical periods and why shared spaces limited deviation. First, it helps to name the basic problem. In a private setting, rules can be enforced by a household or a small group. In public, you deal with strangers and mixed groups with different interests. Public order is harder, but public order is also easier in one way: public behavior is seen. Visibility is one of the strongest forces in social life. When you know you are being watched, you often change what you do. You may follow rules you would ignore in private. You may lower your voice, stand in line, keep your hands visible, or avoid threats. Even without uniformed officers, the presence of many eyes creates pressure. This pressure does not require perfect enforcement. It requires a shared understanding. If I do this here, others will notice, and that will matter. In many pre-modern societies, the main punishment was not long imprisonment. It was often fines, corporal punishment, public humiliation, exile, forced labor, or execution. Many of these worked best in public. They depended on witnesses, and they aimed to teach the community what was allowed. Public places also created patterns. When people gather in the same spot for the same reasons, day after day or week after week, the place becomes predictable. Predictability makes it easier to set expectations. It also makes it easier to spot unusual behavior. A market day has routines: where sellers stand, how weights are checked, where animals are led, where announcements are made, where disputes are heard. A church service has routines: silence, posture, shared prayers, and attention to a speaker. A court session has routines: formal speech, oaths, and public judgment. Over time, the place trains people. It teaches them what is normal here. Public places also connect to reputation. In small towns and neighborhoods, your standing matters. If you are caught cheating in the market, or starting fights in the tavern, or disrupting worship, you may lose trust. That can affect credit, marriage prospects, jobs, and protection from neighbors. Reputation is a kind of social currency. Public places are where it is earned and lost. So the main tools are visibility, routine, reputation, and consequence. Now we can look at how different public places used these tools. Markets and marketplaces were among the most important public places in many societies. They were not only economic centers, they were also centers of control. Markets bring together sellers and buyers who do not always know each other. That creates a risk of fraud. A seller might use false weights, sell watered goods, or lie about quality. A buyer might refuse payment, steal, or because trouble. Since trade supports the town, Rulers and communities had strong reasons to regulate markets. Many towns developed officials whose job was to oversee market behavior. In ancient Greek cities, officials known as agoranomoi oversaw order in the marketplace. Their duties could include checking weights and measures, certifying goods, and controlling certain prices. This is an example of how a public place gained structure through a role tied directly to the space. The market was not just somewhere people sold things, it was a supervised environment with expected conduct. Certain actions, cheating on measures, hoarding, price abuse, disorderly conduct, were treated as violations not only against a person, but against the community. In medieval and early modern Europe, market regulation often included rules about food and drink. Bread and ale were basic goods, and problems in their supply could lead to unrest. Towns and kingdoms developed systems to regulate the weight, price, and quality of bread and beer, including the well-known English tradition called the Assize of Bread and Ale. Local officers could test and report violations, and offenders could be fined or otherwise punished. This kind of regulation shows a basic idea: certain goods were considered too important to leave entirely to private bargaining. The market, as a public place, was treated as a site where fairness had to be visible. Notice how the place itself supports enforcement. In a market, sellers are set up in rows or stalls. Buyers compare prices and goods. Officials can walk the same paths repeatedly. If weights and measures are checked in public, the inspection becomes part of the market's culture. It also gives honest sellers protection, because it builds trust in the space. Markets also often had their own quick courts. In many European towns, disputes arising during market activity could be handled by a special court with fast procedures. The logic was practical. Traders travel, business moves quickly, and justice needs to happen while people are still present. This also shows how public places structured behavior by attaching legal processes to the place and the time. When you enter the market, you are entering a zone where disputes can be judged quickly and publicly. Religious spaces also shaped behavior, often very strongly. Temples, churches, mosques, and other sacred places are built around ideas of purity, respect, and shared attention. They teach posture, speech, and restraint. The rules may be tied to theology, but they also support order. Religious gatherings bring a community together on a schedule. This creates a repeated public event where leaders can speak to many people at once. Announcements can be made, warnings given, and moral expectations reinforced. In many places and times, religious institutions also had their own courts or disciplinary systems, dealing with marriage, sexual conduct, oaths, disputes, and community obligations. Even when formal punishment did not happen in the religious building, the building still mattered. Worship is a public display of belonging. If someone violates the expected behavior, disrupting service, showing disrespect, refusing shared norms, that person stands out. Social pressure increases because the community is gathered and watching. Religious spaces often operated as moral training grounds. They shaped what people believed was shameful, honorable, or dangerous. Those beliefs then guided behavior in other public places, including markets and courts. Civic spaces such as squares, forums, and agoras were centers of politics and public life. In the ancient Greek world, the agora was a marketplace, but also a civic space. In the Roman world, the forum played a similar role. These spaces hosted speeches, business, religious activity, and legal matters. They were places where citizens could gather and be counted, praised, blamed, or pressured. Public political space creates a special kind of discipline, the discipline of public opinion. When decisions are debated in a shared setting, reputations are at stake. People who speak publicly are judged by their peers. Even people who do not speak still learn what is acceptable by watching. In many societies, Public assemblies also served as ways to confirm loyalty and hierarchy. Standing near certain people, wearing certain clothing, and using formal speech all signaled your position. One major function of civic public space was announcement. Before newspapers, radio, and the internet, official news needed a location. Town criers, heralds, and posted notices depended on predictable gathering points. If the community learns that important information is spoken at this corner, or judgments are read on these steps, then the space becomes a public memory. That public memory helps control behavior. If punishments and rules are announced openly, people can be expected to know them. Ignorance becomes a weaker excuse. Legal spaces, especially courts, structured behavior by turning conflict into procedure. In many pre-modern systems, there was no large professional police force to investigate crimes. Many cases began with private accusation. A victim or their family would bring a claim. Witnesses mattered greatly. Oaths mattered greatly. Because of that, courts often operated best in public. A public court creates several pressures. First, it pressures honesty. If you lie under oath in front of neighbors, you risk not only legal punishment, but lasting damage to your standing. Second, it pressures cooperation. If you refuse to participate, you may look guilty or dishonorable. Third, it pressures the community to accept the outcome. A judgment that happens behind closed doors can be viewed as unfair or corrupt. A judgment that happens openly with known procedures is easier to accept, even when people disagree. In classical Athens, for example, the court system played an important role in enforcing not only written law, but also social norms. Public trials were places where citizens could argue about acceptable behavior and community expectations. This shows how legal institutions and public settings work together. Punishment itself also depended on public space. In many periods, punishment was meant to be seen. That could include the pillory, stocks, whipping, branding, public shaming rituals, or execution. These practices were harsh, but their social purpose was clear in the logic of the time. A visible penalty teaches a visible lesson. Public punishment also worked as a warning, not through private fear alone, but through collective memory. People would remember what they saw, and they would retell it. Over time, many societies changed how they punished. In parts of Europe, there was a shift away from public torture and spectacular executions toward more regulated, less visible forms of punishment, including imprisonment. Scholars like Michel Foucault argued that this reflected a broader change in how power worked, less reliance on public spectacle, more reliance on ongoing supervision, record-keeping, and discipline in institutions. Whether one agrees with every detail of that argument or not, the general point helps explain public space. When punishment is public, it uses the crowd and the place as part of the system. When punishment becomes less public, control often moves into buildings and routines that still shape behavior, but in quieter ways. Another important kind of public place was the street. Streets are not just routes. They are shared corridors where people meet, pass, and sometimes clash. In dense towns, the street was the main stage of everyday life. Children played, vendors sold, neighbors watched, and travelers entered. Because streets connect private homes to public life, they are areas where social boundaries are tested. They are where drunkenness, fights, theft, and harassment might happen. They are also where community enforcement can be quick, because people can gather fast. In many places, night was treated differently from day. Without modern lighting and rapid communication, the nighttime street was often feared as a place where normal supervision weakened. Curfews, gate closing, and night watches developed as responses. These measures show how time and space work together. A street at noon could be a controlled space. The same street at midnight could be treated as dangerous. City gates, bridges, and crossroads were special public spaces because they were choke points. When you can control entry and exit, you can control many things: who enters, what goods come in, what taxes are paid, and who is wanted for crimes. Gates also help enforce quarantine during disease outbreaks, and they can be used to display authority. Bridges and crossroads were also places where tolls and rules could be enforced and where travelers could be observed. In many societies, the movement of people was not assumed to be free and unlimited. Travel could be watched and controlled through these physical bottlenecks. Public places also structured behavior through informal community enforcement. Not all control came from rulers or formal courts. Many communities relied on collective pressure. One well-known example in parts of Europe and North America was the practice sometimes called charivari, or rough music, a noisy public ritual used to shame people accused of violating community norms. While practices like this varied widely and could become abusive, they reveal an important system. When formal enforcement was limited, communities sometimes used public display and public embarrassment to punish behavior they considered dangerous to social order. This is another way public places mattered. A shaming ritual only works if it is seen or heard by others. The public street becomes the tool. The same logic appears in simpler, everyday forms. Gossip is a kind of informal court. A public insult can trigger retaliation. A public apology can restore standing. These actions depend on audience. Taverns, inns, and other drinking spaces also shaped behavior. These places brought together locals and strangers, and alcohol raised risks. Many towns tried to regulate taverns through licensing, limits on hours, and rules against gambling, fighting, or hosting certain types of meetings. Taverns could be places of news and negotiation, but also places of disorder. Because of that, they were often watched by neighbors, officials, or both. A tavern keeper's reputation mattered, and licenses could be lost. This is a clear pattern. When a public place creates risks, communities respond by tying responsibility to a person or office. The tavern keeper becomes accountable for what happens inside. That accountability pressures the keeper to manage behavior. Public places also train behavior through architecture and layout. The simplest architectural tool is the open line of sight. When a space is open, it is harder to hide wrongdoing. Open squares, wide market streets, raised platforms for announcements, and central meeting spots all support supervision. A second tool is the boundary. Walls, fences, gates, and marked lines tell people where activities belong. In markets, there may be separate areas for meat, fish, grain, or animals. That separation is not only for convenience. It makes inspection easier and limits conflict. A third tool is the focal point. Many public places have a center, an altar, a speaker's platform, a judge's bench, a town cross, a fountain, or a monument. A focal point directs attention. It also creates a natural front and back, which helps define respectful behavior. A fourth tool is controlled entry. When there are limited doors or clear entrances, it is easier to watch who comes in. This matters for courts, guild halls, and later for many institutions designed for supervision. Even without modern cameras, the basic principle is the same. The built environment can make observation easy and privacy hard. Public places also structured behavior through roles and uniforms, even before modern policing. Many societies used part-time watchmen, gatekeepers, market inspectors, and local officials. These roles may not look like modern police, but they served similar functions, keeping order, responding to complaints, and enforcing rules tied to public spaces. Their presence mattered even when they used little force. Often, the real force came from the community's willingness to back them and from the fear of public consequences. Public places also created shared measurements of fairness. When bread is weighed in public or when prices are announced, or when official scales are used, the public place becomes a site where fairness is performed. This reduces conflict. It also protects the legitimacy of authorities. In times of scarcity, food markets could become tense. People might accuse sellers of hoarding or profiteering. Authorities often responded by increasing inspections, enforcing rules, and making an example of offenders. The goal was not only to punish wrongdoing, but to calm the crowd and show that basic needs were being taken seriously. This points to a deeper reason. Public places' structured behavior, public order, is tied to trust. If people trust the market, they are less likely to riot. If they trust the court, they are less likely to seek private revenge. If they trust public rituals, they are more likely to accept hierarchy. Public places were also where identities were made visible. Clothing, badges, guild marks, religious signs, and forms of speech could identify a person's status or group. In many times, certain groups faced restrictions in where they could go or what they could do in public. This is another way that public space structured behavior, by defining who belonged where. At the same time, public places could also allow limited mixing across social lines. Markets brought together rich and poor. Religious festivals gathered whole communities. These gatherings were useful, but they were also risky. So societies balanced openness with control. That balance helps explain why public places often came with strong rules. Now, it is useful to summarize the main mechanisms that made public places behavior-shaping machines, even without modern law enforcement. One mechanism is audience. Public behavior is shaped by the expectation of being seen. A second mechanism is routine. Repeated public events teach people what is normal. A third mechanism is role-based authority. Specific officials, even part-time, create predictable enforcement. A fourth mechanism is reputation. Public standing affects future opportunities. A fifth mechanism is the connection between space and consequence. If punishment, shaming, fines, or exclusion happen in the same public setting, people learn quickly. A sixth mechanism is architecture. Open sight lines, boundaries, focal points, and controlled entry guide behavior. A seventh mechanism is shared standards. Public weights, measures, posted rules, and oaths create common reference points. An eighth mechanism is collective enforcement. Neighbors and crowds can pressure people to conform. Together, these mechanisms explain why shared spaces limited deviation. It was not only that people feared authority, it was also that public places created constant feedback. They allowed a community to notice, judge, and respond. This also explains an important historical change. As societies grew larger and more complex, informal pressure alone was less reliable. In a small village, everyone knows everyone. In a large city, anonymity increases. When anonymity increases, reputation becomes weaker as a control tool. That creates demand for more formal systems, larger courts, written records, professional watchmen, and later modern police. But even in large cities, public places still mattered. Authorities continued to regulate markets, manage crowds, control assemblies, and design spaces for supervision. The tools changed, but the logic remained. Public places structured behavior because they turned private choices into visible actions. They gathered strangers under shared expectations. They made norms easy to teach and easier to enforce. They reduced uncertainty in trade, worship, politics, and justice. And they helped communities function long before modern law enforcement existed. In the end, the power of public space comes from a simple fact. When behavior is shared, behavior becomes organized. The place is not neutral. The place is part of the system.